Thanks everybody for joining our Coffee Talk session here today. I'm Jon Paquette, SVP Solutions for TIS's US market and the host of our Coffee Talk series. So today we're going to be talking about some of the complexities that NGOs face when they're instituting their cash management, payments, and bank connectivity strategies. NGOs might not be top of mind when you're thinking about organizations with the most complex financial operations. You might be more inclined to think about global Fortune 100 companies, for example, but we actually tend to find that NGOs have some of the most complex setups because of the natures of the activities needed to actually deliver their missions in the areas where they operate. They have a need for a high level of transparency and control. They're operating in some pretty exotic markets where the banking systems might not be quite as developed as they are in the sort of more mature markets. And it really makes for some interesting use cases, in some cases, some pretty out-of-the-box solutions. But I think overall, just some general best practices that can be applied regardless of what industry you're operating in. So that's going to be kind of the nature of our conversation here today. Very happy to have Steve Zaubi here with me today, who's the Director of Treasury at CARE. Steve, maybe you can take a moment here to introduce yourself as well.
Sure, I'd love to, John. Thanks so much, and thanks for having me on. This is a lot of fun, and very excited to share CARE's experience, my experience in Treasury with CARE USA. Some people are, in introducing CARE, I often ask people if they're familiar with the CARE package. A lot of people that went to college would receive CARE packages from folks, but that name began in 1945 when CARE started as an organization in the aftermath of World War II, distributing CARE packages to those countries that were devastated by the war. And from there, it just grew. So CARE USA from there evolved into an organization that's in 45 countries globally. And that number, by the way, is growing all the time. We deal with over 40 currencies, as you referenced, most of which are exotics. Very few hard currencies. We also have what's called safe cash accounts. Got over 260 bank accounts in these countries. What I like to tell people, I've been with the Treasury Department in Home Depot. I've been with the Treasury Department in Delta Airlines and Novelis, the aluminum manufacturer. But I can tell you, CARE, dollar for dollar, is by far the most complex organization I've ever been with, certainly in Treasury. So the challenges are certainly there.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Now, it's a great introduction. I mean, you can already see the complexity variables kind of coming in there with the amount of countries you guys operate in, the fact that you're in a lot of these exotic markets dealing with a lot of different currencies. So maybe one general question to kind of start up here is, could you maybe explain your general cash management strategy in terms of, I guess if we take it from a foundational standpoint, cash visibility. Everybody needs cash visibility. It's the foundation for so many other processes, from forecasting through reconciliation. So maybe what's CARE's general strategy for maintaining cash visibility across all of your operations?
Yeah, and I can tell you that's something, and I'm sure I speak for many other, not just NGOs, but corporates, the way that technology has developed over the past few decades. Nowadays, we have connectivity with most of our banking partners such that we get these SWIFT-based MT940 bank activity files by virtue of being a SWIFT BIC owner. And so CARE USA has its own BIC. By virtue of that, we're able to receive the bank activity files that automatically upload with about a 2 business day lag, and those upload into our ERP, which is PeopleSoft, and that's how we gain visibility. And we try to implement fully automated recon also by virtue of the ability to pull in those files. But that really is important in terms of cash visibility, but then also reconciling its and fraud detection and things like that, having that relatively immediate access to the bank activity.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Particularly, I could see the SWIFT strategy being one that you guys would be looking to leverage because, like we mentioned, exotic markets, these banks don't typically have the resources to invest in host-to-host or API type capabilities. if they're going to support anything at all, typically it's SWIFT, right? And that might be a good way to get that information, or at least you could probably put in place some sort of strategy to collect that reporting through another, partner bank in the region or something like that through SWIFT. So makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And it's interesting. We talked about if folks are familiar with a SCORE bank, SWIFT for corporates, and those are banks that can support the straight-through processing implementation. But we found that many of the banks, the local or regional banks, even though they can't support the payment side of the automation, they can at least deliver, the reporting side. And so that's something that we've been able to capitalize on.
Nice. Yeah, that's key. And I'm sure that reconciliation piece is as well, just to show that, we understand what's happening in our accounts on a day-over-day basis. Things are being consistently reconciled, and at least, prior day or within at least a couple of days of the activity occurring. So makes a lot of sense. As far as broader, I guess, strategies, like, is CARE focused on things like maximizing return on idle cash, or like, limiting interest exposure, those types of factors as well? And kind of what strategies do you guys have in place there?
Right. In the aftermath of COVID, the past several years, obviously, rates were pathetic. The Fed funds rate was 25 basis points or something like that. And a little over a year ago, that began increasing, greatly. Overall, our strategy with cash is to pool the cash worldwide. So we tell our business units that all donated funds must be consolidated centrally into a CARE USA HQ bank account. This is to promote organizational liquidity. We find that oftentimes, a particular project might be funded by a donor, and they front fund $1 million for this project that might not get started for 6 months to a year. So you've got this slug of cash, $1 million, sitting in a developing country that may experience a coup, and with the central bank frozen and shut down, and it's trapped. And this actually happened to us in Cote d'Ivoire a number of years ago. But so that is a requirement. That is a policy, is that all donor funds must be pooled. But I have to tell you, John, there are exceptions. Not all business units, not all of our country offices can comply, because there are certain organizations that refuse to send their cash anywhere but to the country in which it's intended, where the project is located. And so we have waivers, but you're right that many of those accounts are just non-performing, certainly not to the level of the U.S. banks. And of course, there's a lot of risk, oftentimes, depending on the bank, associated with a slug of cash sitting there. But then we also make exceptions for any donations that originate from inside the country. We don't want those donors having to, send the funds across the ocean to a CARE USA account, and then, send them back when the funds are needed.
That's interesting, though. I mean, at least you guys have, the majority of it covered with that cash management, cash consolidation type strategy, and it sounds like you have a good process in place for managing the exceptions to that policy as well. So it's well known, it's documented along the way, and you guys have a good understanding of where cash is sitting globally and the corresponding risk related to it. So yeah, interesting stuff. The other thing I always find fascinating about NGOs is, like how they do their cash forecasting, because it's obviously going to be a lot different than your typical corporate. You guys don't have, sales revenue and corresponding AR that you're using to project out cash receipts and things like that. The business activities are just fundamentally different. So maybe you can take a few minutes here just to kind of explain what you guys are doing from a cash forecasting standpoint as well.
Well, so there's two ways I can approach this. First of all, much like many, let's say, retailers, we know that the holiday season, we're going to see a peak, especially towards year end, and folks want to capitalize on a tax efficient donation, get that tax exemption, whether in the form of an outright, cash donation or stock gift, whatever the case might be. And so we know that we're going to see a significant bump in cash. We also can anticipate that, when there's a catastrophe, the compassion of people all over the world is really poured out. We know that, even though we can't forecast, nobody can forecast a disaster, but we know that, there's going to be an outpouring of compassion in the form of funds to support a humanitarian response. But what's difficult is really for the ongoing projects, the projects that don't necessarily pertain to a crisis or a response to an emergency, but something that is a sustained project, whether it's a work of development. Those are very difficult to forecast because the organization may be, let's say, front-funded a portion of the grant, but we won't get the next tranche of funding until we complete the first and we provide an expense report. And that's not a science. We have our timeline, but you can imagine, the variables involved in that timetable. So that is something that's really, really difficult to forecast.
Yeah, no, makes sense. I had never really considered that, but yeah, a lot of what you guys do is very event driven, where there is some sort of crisis and that drives. Like you said, there's no way to kind of project those things out, as well as the seasonality I hadn't really considered as well around people trying to get their donations in before the tax year calendar kind of closes. So that's interesting too. So yeah, maybe we pivot here a little bit and talk a little bit about the payment strategy, which, obviously TIS is a payments company. We understand global complexity and, a lot of the different requirements that are in place in certain restricted markets and exotic markets. But you guys are dealing with this on a very high level where you're operating in so many of these different markets. So we talked a little bit about how you guys have a swift strategy in place to connect up to these banks, probably provides you the broadest range of coverage. But just kind of curious, how do you guys deal with some of those, I guess, the lack of sort of maturity of the payment systems in some of those markets? Maybe they're a little bit less reliable than in developed markets, for example. Do you guys have certain strategies in place to kind of deal with that?
Well, that's a very good question. So we launched an initiative 10 or 11 years ago. When we became a SWIFT member, we received our own BIC, Cura US 33, by the way. And so we're a SWIFT member, so that we can connect to the SWIFT network and, transmit our batch payment file over the SWIFT network. We have to connect via a SWIFT service bureau. We don't have the machinery or the SWIFT equipment in-house, so we have to rely on a service bureau to transport those files to our banking partners so that they can parse out those payments and distribute them to the beneficiaries. But yeah, to your point, we have a number of banking partners that don't have that capability. And that's not a static number. We were pleasantly surprised, for example, to find out that Zenith Bank in Nigeria, it has a very strong, SWIFT straight-through processing capability. And so we're going to, connect with them and implement this, this project. But when we talk about, other banks, Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, let's say, or Mashreg Bank in Sudan, there's banks like that that certainly don't have the capability. So we've made a lot of headway. I think we've got 15 of our 45 country offices that have the straight-through processing capability. And we've been able to connect other accounts, so multiple accounts within the 15 that we've already implemented. But the concern is, what do we do about those other country offices that don't have a banking partner that can support this? we kindly ask and want to encourage them to change banking partners. If they're in a country that, the bank can't support it, but there is a bank that can, we ask that they shift their business. We want to be sensitive, though, to the folks, to our colleagues in country, because sometimes even though a bank can support straight through processing, they may not be the best bank from a service standpoint. We don't want to let our colleagues down, to sacrifice service for the sake of, the technology aspect. So there's a balance there. The other thing that we've had to consider, especially recently, so we've been at this 10 years, and progress has been painfully slow. And I'm sure you, John, and your colleagues at TIS know about this. But the different bank regulations, country by country, are incredible. They're quite a challenge. I've often said that being a trailblazer in this realm is often overrated, because you fail, you find out why, this is really hard to implement. The prestige of possibly being a trailblazer is really eliminated by the fact that, man, we tried to do this and it didn't work. Case in point, we had Bangladesh, for example, and, we were all set. We got the file format, the specifications to make this work, to link, format wise, our file, and make sure it was compatible to the bank regulations for Bangladesh. On the tail end of the project, however, this was not disclosed to us early on, but they required a purpose of payment code. And so if this was going to be a salary payment, a vendor payment, a tax payment, or there's a whole list of different payments, it had to be in a specific field. And because these payments go through the local clearing network of each country, PeopleSoft did not have that field. That was a customization, and as we all know, customization is a dirty word when it comes to these implementations. So that's something that we had to back off. We invested so much time and effort into that, and then we're stopped cold. Then I will tell you, a couple of years later, we found a way forward, and that was by virtue of our banking partner that could facilitate, some kind of translation, some kind of mechanism to make that work. But that's an example. We've experienced this many times. A project that should take 3 months to complete, it took us 5 months to figure out we couldn't do it. Had to, put it on the shelf and then revisit it 2 years later. When that happens, that just really slows things down. Now, tell me where you want to go next. I mean, I could talk about some other stories that might be interesting, but what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, those are interesting points. I mean, we run into that all the time as well when we're operating in kind of exotic markets, as purpose of payment being a requirement, or needing to provide like a beneficiary contact name, phone, email, kind of these non-traditional type elements, or even like needing to use local language characters in the payment file to be able to deliver the instrument locally.
But they have to be Swift compatible, right?
Yeah. So you never quite know what you're going to run into as you go into these markets, and it does. And also, we tend to find that, depending on the relationship in the markets, these banks might not have a ton of resources devoted to these payment testing projects. So it could take a while to get somebody's attention to actually, understand these requirements, take a look at some test files and things like that. So that tends to lead to longer lead times as well in those markets. But that's also an interesting point. We always run into the one around, if your organization is focused on automation straight through processing, you're going to need to partner with banks that also support that as well, have the capabilities on their side to be able to facilitate that, which isn't always the case. So you always run into situations where maybe a local bank needs to be swapped out for a more major bank if you're really focused on the operational improvements. But then the flip side of that is the relationship. a local relationship that the employees, that the business people have with those banks, and needing to kind of strike the balance between those two things. I'm sure it's it's probably really prevalent in the markets where you guys operate. So.
Yep.
But yeah, maybe we can move on to some of the. I know you guys are in some markets in Africa where there's some unique, I guess, payment channels and payment networks that might not exist within U.S. and the more developed markets. So I wanted to see if maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the, I guess, more creative solutions you guys have put in place, or some of the stuff that kind of is outside the traditional banking network type infrastructure to be able to support payments in those markets.
Yeah, no, I can. If I can start off with this anecdotally, this is before I joined CARE. You may recall the devastating earthquake in Haiti that occurred almost, I want to say 20 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And CARE wanted to launch a response. Now everything, the devastation was such that the central bank had to close, and the banks closed. So how are you going to deliver aid? How are you going to, support monetarily, the people that you need to engage and begin, supporting CARE's efforts to address this crisis? We had a woman that went to the local bank and stuffed a suitcase with $10,000 and was praying profusely that customs would not look in, so she was within the law in terms of the amount of currency, but that's something that, and you can imagine the liability associated with that. We've not done that since. So I'm happy to say that, but you're right on target when you say that we've had to be creative. And my NGO peers that might be listening in, I'm sure that you're thinking about all kinds of things that, money transfer agents, some of the more conventional ones being, for example, Western Union. So we had a coup in Sudan, and the central bank was shut down. We understand that the Bank of Khartoum was operating in a limited basis, but we had to deliver, salary payments, and we relied on Western Union, for that. Some of the staff, the local staff, fled to other countries, Egypt and in some other places in nearby countries. And so that's how we supported them. But when we're talking about places where there's no banking infrastructure, there's no banks, that's where it becomes interesting. I mentioned, I think earlier, that we've got these safe cash accounts, and really what these are, they're CARE's bank. It's a concrete, house with, incredible, security built in. But to get cash to there, we always hope that a banking partner has a reliable means of transportation, kind of like the Brinks or, the armored carriers in Western countries. But we're finding that that's rare. So we can rely on a funds transfer mode known as hawalas. And if you've been into the INGO sphere for any length of time, you're quite familiar with hawalas. They specialize in transporting cash in country or cross border, to deliver to the agency that has engaged their services. And we've had to rely, and I'll give you an example with Afghanistan. When the U.S. Military left the country of Afghanistan, I think that was August of 2021, and they froze U.S. assets, right? So, CARES assets, even inside that country, were frozen. But we had a number of individuals and staff that were really hurting because they had no means of being paid. We had to find a way to get money in to support them. And this was through the Hawalas. Now, I'm no expert on the Hawalas, to my knowledge. This is a I don't know what to call them, like a practice. It's a maybe the equivalent of what we would call a funds transfer agent, a money transfer agency. I don't know, but they've been around for a long time, and they were ready to go. It was amazing. We thought that perhaps because U.S. dollars were frozen, that even the Hawalas would only have limited access to dollars. That was not the case. It's almost as if they had gobs of dollars waiting for this very moment. So there's no question you have to get creative. Unless you want to change directions, I can share another anecdote if
yeah, for sure.
The other thing, in some countries, they're we have to use a broker. And what I mean by that is that, the broker identifies an organization, a company, let's say, in Myanmar, that has Myanmar, is it Kyat, the currency, and they want to translate that into US dollars and give it out of the country. Whereas CARE has US dollars that we want to get in the country and translate that to MMK, the local currency. And so there are agencies that specialize that. They identify entities on both sides. It's like an options market, but they broker the deals. And again, that to me is so creative, and it's a win-win. And so you're right, and it's not just INGOs, because for the organizations in Myanmar, these are corporates. These might be, I'm just going to throw some, perhaps Coca-Cola. I don't know, but if they're in that place, obviously they're not a not-for-profit, but they want to get their money out, and so there are different mechanisms, that can do that.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. In particular, I know that you had brought up Hawalas once before, so I did a little research on it myself, and it's just fascinating. And it obviously predates the traditional banking market. It's been around for hundreds of years, and has a reputation of being highly reliable, although the whole thing is kind of on the honor system, more or less. It's just like there's not actually legal recourse you could take if the funds don't reach their destination, but the reliability of it kind of gives people a lot of faith in the service itself. So that's definitely
and along those lines, many Hawalas, you don't pay them until they deliver the cash. That's the confidence that they have. They know what they're doing, right?
Right.
And and that just adds, to our confidence that we're going to get the money and settle with them.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys also using any of these like mobile payment networks in Africa, like M-Pesa, Safaricom? These have come up time again, I think, with our conversations with NGOs.
Those are actually very important. I want to say mostly for some of the projects, cash distribution, voucher distribution. A lot of the participants in projects, those who have been impacted, are refugees, or they've lost everything, they've had to flee their homes or something, and we want to deliver the aid necessary for them to get staples, to feed their families, to purchase clothes, and so forth. From a Treasury standpoint, I can identify a way perhaps to fund a certain account, but getting the funds to what we refer to as the final mile, like, Steve, that's great. You might get the funds to Commercial Bank of Kenya, but how is the money that's at the Commercial Bank of Kenya going to reach those in need, those that actually, and so, there are in Africa, especially East Africa, but now more so in West Africa as well, agencies that have a really strong mobile network, mobile payments network. The Africans and people in developing countries historically would just carry their wealth, either, let's say, bound around their neck, a little pouch, or hide it in their home, because, they didn't qualify to have a bank account. But now, because they've got this, their mobile device, and they can use M-Pesa as the agency to fund or to facilitate the funding of, a mobile, a mobile account. That's much safer because that's password protected. They've got their bank in their hand, and if they lose their device, that doesn't mean they lost their money. It's retrievable still. And so that's really important. It's interesting, that is a technology and a practice that in some ways has leapfrogged, the US. Can you imagine? We still greatly rely on checks. And, the Africans may roll their eyes and say, checks, are you kidding me? Haven't you guys discovered the ease? And of course, there's all kinds of payment rails, as we know, in the US, Apple Pay and, Google Pay. A lot more than I do, PayPal and whatnot, Venmo. But they've got this down, working very well, extremely efficient. And going to a marketplace, if you've ever been to an African marketplace, let's say Nairobi or wherever, a big city, hustling, bustling, all kinds of things. And, somebody buys, greens and chicken and so forth, and they pay the vendor from one mobile device to another. They don't have to exchange cash. And that to me is just incredible. So, that solves the question. Yeah, we have all this money that we can put forth to help people out of poverty. It only matters if they know, if we can deliver it such that they can buy food and clothing and, things like that. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how much money we have. We have to be able to deliver that in a reliable manner.
That makes sense. Kind of brings me to my next point here too, that in some cases there's a lot of complexity in just finding the right method to be able to actually make that payment. But the other side of that is the risk associated with making that payment. I'm sure you guys as a INGO have your eyes on anti-money laundering, sanctions requirements, and things like that, right? So there's a huge amount of risk in making these payments. So I'm just curious, how do you guys manage that in general? How do you make sure the payment's actually reaching its intended recipient? Do you have any processes in place around that?
Oh yeah. So a lot of these projects of providing aid via mobile payment or voucher or whatever, they're driven by USAID and other large donor organizations, and that is front and center, for their concerns to make sure that those funds aren't being inadvertently distributed to to the wrong crowd, to bad actors, let's say. And so there is a registration process that is increasingly, again, becoming sophisticated. There's technology, for example, that relies on facial recognition, and so when a registrant signs up as a participant to receive aid, all the requisite information is taken. Highly secure, by the way, very, behind a firewall, so that, it's not stolen or anything like that. But what that does is, when an individual then is registered, and their mobile phone, let's say, receives a certain amount of cash, they go to certain markets that are participants, with the project, and they can buy the staples that they need. But when it comes time to pay, they need this to work in terms of their facial recognition technology, that they are who they say they are. So somebody can't steal a code or something like that. They would have to steal the appearance of someone, and that's just not easy. What's interesting is that kind of technology works even if somebody grows a beard, or it's really smart technology, and that's really appealing. You can imagine to donor organizations to make sure that the funds will reach the intended target. That's so critical. And oftentimes those are women, because women, have that natural, desire to do anything they need to do to feed their kids. And so that's why we like to help as many as we can, in particular women and children.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm sure the advances in biometric scans and validations and facial recognition technology have made that process a lot simpler than it probably was in previous days when those technologies weren't available. So that's a huge case for that technology. So
yeah. By the way, you had asked about I think money laundering and other things. So I don't know if this is necessarily something that corporates have to deal with, but we're CARE, along with other INGOs, we have to pay a number of vendors, thousands of vendors worldwide, and we have our own very robust sanctions screening software. It's called Bridger, and it references and accesses sanctions databases from all over the world. So any vendor that we do business with, even potential hires, they're vetted thoroughly, and so that's something that's really important. But one of the problems that we often have is when we try to send a payment, and our banking partner uses an automated screening application, and they flag a vendor. So they are screening, you can imagine, perhaps hundreds of thousands of vendors a day, that are overseas and whatnot. If ours is flagged, what we found out is that goes through a queue, and it has to be manually cleared. Now, I will tell you, we've had certain payments held for 2 months, by a banking partner, because automatically it was kicked out, it was flagged because of the profile of the vendor. All right, that was automatic. But to clear that person required manual analysis. And there was a queue a mile long, for staff, the bank staff, to work that manual clearing. What I would explain to our banking partners is, look, you don't understand what's going on here. If this vendor doesn't get paid, in the US, an unpaid vendor would go see their lawyer. In Somalia, an unpaid vendor will go see their cousin who's in the army and has a rifle. That's how this works. So we don't have the luxury of that kind of delay. And there are stories like that. I'm not aware of any casualties because of a delayed payment, but there have been instances years ago that the vendor wasn't paid for one reason or another, and so he brought in a relative with a military rifle and said, "We're not leaving until we get paid," and they were paid. But that's what we need to convey, to our banking partners, understanding that they've got their marching orders. No bank wants to see their name in the headlines of the Wall Street Journal for the wrong reason. You know, that headline risk, that reputational risk of inadvertently funding terrorism because they didn't properly do the vetting. So they're, you know, it's a tough space, tough spot to be in sometimes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned that you guys have your own internal tool in place as well to scan for sanctions, but obviously that's not going to bypass the bank's process. It's still going to get held up at the bank if it hits on a sanctions list or suspected alert on their side. But does it at least help you guys figure out up front like what probably will get caught up in the bank's tool, and I guess put you in a better spot to say, okay, we better start preparing some documentation to have this released, and try to make this process at least as frictionless as possible.
Yeah. Well, you know, imagine this. Let's say that you know, Steve Zaubi is getting paid in Yugoslavia, and for some reason, I show up on the sanctions list, right? And so at that point, so I'm talking about the care side. You know, they put me in as a vendor, and I'm vetted through our Bridger process. I'm flagged, and so then the next step is that, okay, let's get Steve's social security number, address, and all this other stuff to see if this is the same Steve Zaubi that is, you know, a bad actor. So we can do that, you know, without too much trouble. But that same equivalent process for Citibank that is processing tens of thousands of, you know, payments a day, you know, you know, the system, the vetting system is going to err on the side of being conservative. They're more likely to identify false positives for fear of letting something slip through. And so they're going to err on that side. But, you know, even a subset, you know, even a small percentage of, you know, vendors that are flagged by Citibank, that's an enormous number of entities that have to be manually cleared. So, you know, I'm not sure what automated feature they can implement for that, but right now, and it's not just Citibank, I've talked to a number of banks about this, and I don't think there's any really easy solution.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be just sort of a one-on-one review of every single transaction that's a suspected hit. So we're seeing a lot of the same things on the banking side. You know, maybe pivoting to the other side of risk, you know, not payments risk necessarily, but you mentioned you guys operate in, I think, 40 different currencies, right? So there must be some kind of currency risk, FX exposure that the company's managing. It sounds like predominantly you guys try to convert everything back to US dollars, hold it locally in a US account. So that simplifies the process quite a bit. And then some of these markets where the currency itself is restricted, you're using these local kind of conversion agents, which is another strategy. But anything else in place that you guys are using from a currency risk standpoint, or is this like a formalized program, I guess, at CARE, where you guys are like really proactively thinking about managing all the currency risk from those 40 different currency pairs?
You know, John, that is really an enormous issue for a lot of NGOs, and I'll tell you why. So the past 2 years, we know that, you know, the U.S. dollar appreciated greatly versus all other currencies and the euro and so forth, and that resulted in hyperinflation for some of the countries that we operate in. Because all of a sudden, you know, their currency was worth less and less, and if they're paid the same amount in the local currency, their purchasing power was diminishing. So, excuse me. So recently, what we did is we created an FX management policy mandating that all of our country offices had to have a strategy in mind, and I can give you some examples. You know, if for example, you know, CARE USA obviously is dollar functional in terms of our accounting, our financial reports. It's dollar functional, and many of our country offices, you know, they budget in dollars, but they pay in local currency, and but the dollar amount is established at the beginning of the fiscal year. So and so rather than use the start of the fiscal year, that rate, and carry that through the entire fiscal year, some country offices are saying, well, look, how about we do this? We'll still pay our colleagues the same number of dollars converted into local currency, but let's update the conversion rate. So if they pay their salary, the local salary at the end of the month, let's not rely on the budget rate that was created 2 or 3 months ago. Let's update that rate based on a neutral source, exchange that's fair, that's publicly accessible, and that way, any fluctuation, any depreciation of the currency can be made up for by virtue of this updated exchange rate. Those are some of the things, and I will tell you, it's a lot more complicated than that because of the donors. We have donor agreements and government regulations and other things that we run into that prevent that kind of solution. But for some, that is a valid solution. And we work in some countries, by the way, that permit payment in US dollars. And that's what our staff, there's just a few, that permit that. And that's what our staff, would prefer, but a lot of countries would not permit US dollars. The vendors would not accept US dollars. And but the idea is every CARE USA country office has to have a strategy for dealing with currency fluctuation and hyperinflation. Preventive. It's to mitigate the risk so that our humanitarian operations are not disrupted by these unique circumstances.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, I think that's the same with a lot of the processes you described, is they almost vary market to market depending on, the regulations in place, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and it's almost like a custom solution
now, for sure.
Yeah, everywhere you guys are going, across the board here. Really interesting. So, yeah, I know we're starting to come to the end of our conversation here, and I definitely want to save some time for Q&A. I'm sure some questions have rolled in during the course of the conversation, but maybe just one wrap-up point, for you guys. What's next? Is there any really key technology you see out there where you say, hey, this would be great for solving XYZ problem, or anything you really have your eye on to kind of simplify things further?
One of my concerns the past few years, I talked about the straight through processing and so forth, and that's gone fairly well. We've run into some hiccups. It's not gone, I fully expected when we launched this 10 years ago that we would be done by now. We're not. And I've often thought, geez, are we going to be leapfrogged technologically in the way that we're implementing this? And I'm thinking about APIs. I'm thinking about, let's say, some of the banks, it's really a difficult task sometimes to connect with the bank and to make everything work in that SWIFT context. I often wonder if with all the fintechs and the TMS solutions, capabilities, if there's something. So there's a lot for us to explore. Of course, everyone knows also about AI and how that could potentially help. So there's that. I have a litany of items that I'd like to investigate. My INGO peers, that might be listening in, sometimes we're so understaffed, we're just treading water about the current crisis. We would all like to not just solve what we're experiencing now, but to think ahead, to be, okay, we're fine today, but we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and to have that foresight. So that we're prepared. We don't know where the next crisis is going to happen, and so having that preparation, doing that advanced research, so that whatever happens, if operations shut down in Sudan, for example, okay, well, here's the solution. Those are some of the things that I'd like to solve so that we can provide uninterrupted financial support to deliver humanitarian aid wherever and whenever it's needed. From a Treasury standpoint, that's the whole liquidity thing. The purpose of Treasury, we don't exist because of ourselves. Our mandate is to support the mission, to support the people on the cutting edge who are delivering the aid. And are really, folks at risk, we want to make sure that they don't have to worry about the money piece. That's where, my focus has been going forward.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, I mean, you guys have to make sure that the processes that you have in place that are proven, that work, continue to function as intended to be able to support the mission overall. You're probably not in a great position to just sort of be a guinea pig for emerging technologies, but more so proven solutions that are going to help make the mission more streamlined, more frictionless. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Great. Well, I mean, thanks a lot, Steve. I mean, this was a great conversation. Yeah, I'm sure we could go on and on and on about a lot of these different topics, but unfortunately, we only have an hour here, and I do want to save some time for questions from the audience. So, Jen, maybe I'll bring you back online here and see if maybe any questions came in during the course of today's session.
Sure thing. We had 3 questions come in. The first one came in from Curtis. How does CARE USA accurately measure the margin costs charged by banks, brokers when converting currency or remitting exotic currencies overseas?
We use a product, an online platform called 360T, to competitively bid every currency transaction. And this is a policy. We don't allow our country offices to conduct their own FX. So we have a number of counterparties or FX business partners that are engaged in that provide exotic currency FX translation, and that really for us has been the primary means of ensuring that we're getting fair rates. Because if you're familiar with some of these online platforms like this one 360T, what it does is we put the trade out there, selling US dollars and buying whatever Ghanaian CD or something like that. And if we have 8 counterparties, what 360T does over the minute or 2 minutes when that trade is live, it will collect all the bids and rank them from the best to the worst. And all we have to do is click on the one that we want, which is the best. And that's how we ensure, we're getting, the best rates available, at least among the counterparties with whom we trade. Does that answer your question? Is that kind of what you were asking?
I will find out from Curtis if he responds after that, but
Okay.
I'll let you know, Steve. Thank you so much. Next question comes in from Eliza. What does the continuous improvement process look like at CARE? There's another part to this question. How do you make sure that the systems and processes in place are still best practice, or if there are areas where you need to invest in upgrading technology?
Yeah, excellent question. So there's a couple things I can answer on this. So we have periodic meetings with our bank representatives. And because we're an INGO, the relationship managers, that's their space. They have relationships with other INGOs. Invariably, I always ask them, what am I missing here? CARE's business, what we're doing, what we have implemented. To some extent, we rely on our banking partners to tell us, based on their experience and their scope of visibility to all these other NGOs, what's going on, what are the trends, where are things going, and so that's one thing I do. I want to know what we're missing. That's one thing, and then attending the conferences. I know that not everyone can do that, but I am going around at whether it's AFP or Treasurer's Roundtable or something like that, and I am looking, and I've got maybe a list of needs, things I'm interested in, and I'm going to find those vendors and say, this is my problem. This is the problem that we're facing. What do you think? And then also, obviously, attending the sessions. So self-education is really important. In this, sometimes the constraints are monetary. We're a not-for-profit, so that can mitigate implementation of the absolute best practice available. But we're always, trying to self-educate and train our staff and so forth, so that, we've got the best possible solution.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And Curtis said thank you for answering, Steve. He is already speaking with CARE UK, Leo Skyner, and he sent you a LinkedIn connection so you can continue the conversation there.
Great.
Last question comes in from Grace. How do you maintain knowledge of the payments and banking capabilities and regulations in all of the markets where you operate? Do you have this knowledge in-house, or do you need to leverage consultants who are experts in these regions?
What was the first part of that question?
How do you maintain knowledge of the payments and banking capabilities and regulations in all the markets you operate?
Right. We rely on our bankers. That's so we've got a number of bank relationships, and we found out the other day, for example, through one of our FX trading partners, that the Nigerian naira, the NGN, is now free floating. And I don't know how broadly that was known before it became official. But we rely on our FX trading partners and our bankers and our local staff. And so, we find, for example, that, I mentioned that we trade on behalf of our country offices. Occasionally, our country office representatives will come back to me and say, Steve, we can't do this anymore because the government just imposed a regulation that says that all FX trades must occur onshore, not offshore, and that precludes, the trading practice that we've been using, perhaps. So, it's things like that. We have to rely on FX trading partners, our banking partners, to keep us up to date on such things. And by the way, that's our expectation. If they don't do that, I can't help but say that makes me angry and disappointed in them, because they should be the experts. That bank is operating in a country that has just changed the rules about something. We would expect them to know that and to communicate that immediately, so that we can take appropriate action, and so that we don't violate, so that we maintain full compliance, whatever those regulations are. Usually, though, we found that there's a grace period for some of the regulations. We've seen this in the past, but no, that's a good question. I could talk a lot about the expectations I have with our banking partners and what they should be doing, but that's certainly one of them. They should be having their own webinars about, hey, this is coming down the pike. This change is going to happen, and we'd like to discuss what this means for you. That's what should be happening.
Yeah, those are some great questions. You get the sense that everybody kind of recognizes the complexity that you guys are dealing with on a day-over-day basis. So, definitely some good points to inject there at the end. And, if anybody wants to continue the conversation or has any questions about anything we discussed during the course of the conversation here today, feel free to email or reach out through LinkedIn. Sounds like some people are already doing that, so that's great. But I know myself, and I'm sure Steve as well, more than happy to connect and talk through anything in more detail. So otherwise, appreciate everybody joining the session here today. I hope you found it informative, and we hope to see you on our next coffee talk as well. Thanks, everybody.
John.